Hi everyone. BCA, this was Wednesday, and this is right after the class. I'm going to review some of the items we covered, finishing up Unit 6 really, and the exam, the assessment for Units 5 and 6, or Chapters 5 and 6, is Friday. We talked about, I asked if there's questions on security issues, security terminology. There were none. We talked then about attacks. Anybody can create an attack. It could be unstructured or it could be very structured, depending on, is it just random, somebody wants to hack in, see what they can find, so forth, whereas somebody has a plan where they're going to get a specific thing. People can attack in terms of data, whether they want to change data, see data, view data, manipulate, so forth. Or we can have the idea they want to stop access to a server, a device, and so forth. We use the term denial of services. And we gave some examples, actually. We gave quite a few examples. We talked a little bit about 911. Schools got firewalls, so terrorists could not, after 911, terrorists could not get into schools, high schools, elementaries, and have access to all those PCs in order to launch an attack somewhere else. We talked a little bit about how a firewall works, blocks untrusted from coming in, like from the internet, but in your trusted network, if you need to go out, it creates a path to bring it back in. Okay, so the blue then creates a way for that to come back in based on where you're going, like which IP you went to, they're going to let that one back in, and what you're doing. Like if you're doing access to the web, port 80 is going to let that port 80 back in. Now, we also talked about DMZ, where you're going to have to allow maybe a web server be accessed externally and then send the information back out to the untrusted network. That web server now may come in and access maybe an SQL database, and then this creates some issues also. So you can kind of see how that might work. I'll repeat this again. Then we start talking about different ways to control access. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Pattern of a hacker. We briefly mentioned reconnaissance. They look and see, most of this is legal. You can look and see different things about networks externally. People start doing port scans, look for open ports, or ping scans, in which they're looking to see if there's an IP address that returns a ping, and then they know it's available. Then they figure out a way to access it. They escalate their privileges. They can hack in, escalate their privileges, cover their trail. Sometimes they'll, adjust logs, and sometimes then they may even create a backdoor. Another way to access. How do we stop that? We talk about authentication, what you have, what you are, what you know. Authenticate, and then authorization. Once you authenticate, then what can you do? What are you authorized to do within access to whatever you're accessing? And then we keep track of what you did. And we gave some examples of that. And now, go to the next page here. I already covered that. Data cryptography. I mentioned that on, I believe, the other class when I did the review. Encryption. We can encrypt data and decrypt data. We did an example. You have some algorithm that allows you, based on some key, to encrypt the data and decrypt it. We can create a hash on the data and create some fixed size hash that represents the data. So, in example, if you move data from one location to another, you can encrypt it so nobody can read it, and you can send a hash, and after they decrypt it, then they can compare the hashes and make sure the data hasn't changed. You can also use hashes to create digital signatures. You can take the original data, add a little piece of information about you, like your name, then hash that, and then when it gets to the other side, you can send that hash with it. When it gets to the other side, they can decrypt the data, add that little bit of information about you, and hash it, and then compare those two hashes. If they match, must be you. A little more sophisticated in the real world, but that's basic, some of those basic ideas. Hardening equipment, that idea is to remove all the vulnerabilities of equipment in terms of security. Simple thing, like if they don't need to use a USB drive, you could disable all the USB drives so somebody can't stick a USB drive in. That's a simplistic one, but there's all kinds of things you can do to harden the equipment so it's not as vulnerable to attacks or things going wrong. Same thing with software, how you configure a computer, or how you have the software configured. And we also talked here about updates, software updates. It's important for security purposes to make sure your computer has all the correct software updates for your software. If something does happen, there's got to be a way to handle the incident. And that could be stated in your policy. We need policies in terms of security. All companies need security policies. Here at NIACC we have security policies in which govern how you're going to manage your security, what people can or can't do, and what happens if they break the rules. Last thing here, tools. We already mentioned firewalls. You can have intrusion detection, prevention systems that monitor your network and keep track if something unusual happens. You have spyware. You have software to detect viruses, to detect any type of malware, stuff you don't want on your computer. You need to always secure your wireless, and if you really don't want things changed or you don't want something, you have to be careful about the physical location of your equipment. Who physically has access to the device? And that would be it for today.